Success Story by P.G. Wodehouse. To a man like myself, accustomed to making his midday meal of bread and cheese and a pint of bitter, it was very pleasant to be sitting in the grill room of the best restaurant in London, surrounded by exiled Grand Dukes, chorus girls, and the better type of millionaire, and realising that it wasn't going to cost me a penny. I beamed at Ukridge, my host, and across the table with its snowy napery and shining silver, he beamed back at me. He reminded me of a genial old 18th century squire in the coloured supplement of a Christmas number presiding over a dinner to the tenantry. "Don't spare the caviar, Corky," he urged cordially. "I said I wouldn't. Eat your fill of the whitebait. I said I would. And when the porterhouse steak comes along, wade into it with your head down and your elbows out at right angles." I'd already been planning to do this. A man in the dreamlike position of sharing lunch at an expensive restaurant with a Stanley Featherstone Hall ukridge who has announced his intention of paying the score does not stint himself. His impulse is to get his while the conditions prevail. Only when the cigars arrived and the founder of the feast, ignoring the lesser breeds, selected a couple that looked like young torpedoes did I feel impelled to speak a word of warning. "I suppose you know those cost about 10 bob apiece. A bagatelle, laddie. If I find them a cool, fragrant and refreshing smoke, I shall probably order a few boxes." I drew at my torpedo in a daze. During the past week or two, rumours had been reaching me that SF Ukridge, that battered football of fate, was mysteriously in funds. Men spoke of having met him, and having had the half-crowns which they automatically produced waved away with a careless gesture and an amused laugh. But I had not foreseen opulence like this. "Have you got a job?" I asked. I knew that his aunt, the well-known novelist Miss Julia Ukridge, was always trying to induce him to accept employment, and it seemed to me that she must have secured for him some post which carried with it access to the till. Ukridge shook his head. "Better than that, old horse. I have at last succeeded in amassing a bit of working capital, and I am on the eve of making a stupendous fortune." "What at, you ask?" "That, laddie, it is too early to say. I shall look about me. But I'll tell you one thing. I shall not become master of ceremonies at an East End boxing joint, which was the walk in life which I was contemplating until quite recently." "When did I see you last?" 3 weeks ago. "You touched me for half a crown. Rest assured that you will be repaid 1,000-fold. I feed such sums to the birds." 3 weeks ago, eh? My story begins about then. It was shortly after that I met the man in the pub who offered me the position of announcer and master of ceremonies at the Mammoth Palace of Pugilism in Bottleton East. What made him do that? He seemed impressed by my voice. I had just been having a political argument with a deaf communist at the other end of the bar, and he said he had been looking for a man with a good carrying voice. He told me that there was an unexpected vacancy, owing to the late incumbent having passed out with cirrhosis of the liver, and said the job was mine if I cared to take it. Of course, I jumped at it. I had been looking out for something with a future. There was a future in it, you felt, a very bright future. Think it out for yourself. Although the patrons of an institution like that are mostly costermongers and jellied eel sellers, mingled with these there is a solid body of the intelligentsia of the racing world. Trainers, jockeys, stable lads, touts and what not. They all fawn on the master of ceremonies, and it would, I anticipated, be but a question of time before some inside tip was whispered in my ear, enabling me to clean up on an impressive scale. And so I thanked the man profusely, and stood him drinks, and it was only after he had about 6 that he revealed where the catch lay. Quite casually, in the middle of the love feast, he said how much he was looking forward to seeing me standing in the ring in my soup and fish. Ukridge paused dramatically, gazing at me through the pince-nez which he had fastened to his ears, as always, with ginger beer wire. "Soup and fish, Corky, that upset you?" The words were like a slosh on the 3rd waistcoat button. "You mean you hadn't got dress clothes?" "Exactly. Some months previously, when I was living with my aunt, she had bought me a suit, but I had long since sold it to defray living expenses, And the man went on to make it sickeningly clear that a master of ceremonies at the Bottleton East Mammoth Palace of Pugilism simply could not get by without what the French call the grand tenue. One can see, of course, why this is so. An MC must impress, he must diffuse a glamour. Costermongers and jellied eel merchants like to look on him as a being from another and more rarefied world, and faultless evening dress, preferably with a diamond solitaire in the shirt front, is indispensable. So that was that. A stunning blow, you will agree. Many fellows would have fallen crushed beneath it. But not me, Corky. Who was it said, "You can't keep a good man down"? Jonah, taunting the whale. Well, that was what I said to myself. Quickly pulling myself together, I thought the whole thing out, and I saw that all was not lost. A tie, a celluloid collar, a celluloid dicky, and a diamond solitaire, you can get them for 3p, if you know where to go, were within my means. The only problem now was securing the actual suit. He paused, puffing at his cigar. Next day, Ukridge went on, I called upon George Tupper at the Foreign Office, full of the will to win. For the purchase of a second-hand suit of dress clothes, it seemed to me that a 5 should be ample. And if you catch old Tuppy in a good mood, on a morning when mysterious veiled women haven't been pinching his draft treaties, you can often work him for a 5. But the happy ending was not to be. Tuppy was away on holiday. In my opinion, Corky, these pampered bureaucrats take too many holidays, and I don't like it. As one of the people of England, I pay George Tupper his salary, and I expect service. Still, there it was. I came away and went round to your rooms, only to find that you had locked up all your effects. I wouldn't let this cold, suspicious frame of mind grow upon me, Corky. It's bad for the character. Well, after that there was nothing left for me to do but go to the Cedars, Wimbledon Common, and endeavour to get into my aunt's ribs. It was not a task to which I looked forward with a great deal of relish, for we were on distant terms at the time. In fact, when kicking me out of the house, she had firmly stated that she never wished to see my ugly face again. I did not expect to be effusively welcomed, nor was I. I found her on the point of departure for the Riviera. The car was actually at the door when I arrived, and Oakshott, the butler, was assisting her to enter. On seeing me, she sniffed with a sound like someone tearing a sheet of calico. But she did not actually bat me over the head with her umbrella, so I got in too, and we drove off. My first move, of course, was to give her the old oil. "Well, Aunt Julia," I began, "you're looking fine." She said I was looking terrible and asked what I wanted. "Merely to see you, Aunt Julia. Simply to assure myself that you continue in good health, a nephew's natural anxiety. Still, if you do happen to have a suit of dress clothes on you—" "Why do you want dress clothes? What has become of the suit I bought you? It is a long and sad story. I suppose you sold it?" "Certainly not. If you think that of me—" "I do. In that case, I have nothing more to say." "Then you had better get out. Tell Wilson to stop the car." I had no intention of telling Wilson to stop the car until I had reasoned and pleaded. I did so all the way to the station, but without avail. "Ah, well," I said, at length abandoning the fruitless discussion. We were standing on the platform by that time. "Then shall we compound for a 5, just to keep the book straight?" Her metallic snort told me that the suggestion had not gone well. "I would not dream of giving you money. I know you, Stanley. The first thing you would do would be to go and gamble with it." And so saying, she got into the train, not even pausing to bestow a farewell kiss, and I stood there shaking in every limb. A boy with a wheeled vehicle tried to interest me in buns, sandwiches and nut chocolate, but I scarcely heard him. Absorbed and distracted, I was examining from every angle the colossal idea which had just leaped into my mind. It was that word gamble that had done it. It is often that way with me. One of the most interesting phenomena of this modern life of ours, Corky, is the tendency of owners of large houses to convert them for the night, or for as many nights as they can manage without being raided, into gambling joints. They buy half a dozen chamois shoes, some cards and a few roulette wheels, and send out word to the sporting element that the doings are on, and the latter comes surging round in shoals. With the customary rake-off for the house, the profits are enormous. Why then, I was asking myself, should I not, during my aunt's absence, throw the Cedars, Wimbledon Common, open to the pleasure-seeking and scoop in a vast fortune? I could detect no flaws in the scheme. Always cautious and prudent, I tried hard to find some, but without success. Once or twice in most lifetimes, projects present themselves which the dullest and most naked eye can spot at sight as pure goose, and this was one of them. It was that almost unheard-of rarity, a good thing with no strings attached to it. Of course, before the venture could become a going concern, there were certain preliminaries that had to be seen to. It would, for instance, be necessary to square Oakshott, who had been left in charge of the premises, and even to cut him in as a partner. For it was he who would have to supply from his savings the capital required for the initial outlay. Chamois shoes cost money, so do cards, and you cannot obtain a roulette wheel by mere charm of manner. Obviously, someone would have to do a bit of digging down, and I, being, as I have shown, a trifle strapped at the moment, everything seemed to point to this butler. But I felt confident that I should be able to make him see that here was his big chance. I had run into him at race meetings once or twice on his afternoon off, and knew him to be well equipped with sporting blood. A butler, but one of the boys. I found Oakshott in his pantry. Dismissing with a gesture the housemaid who was sitting on his knee, I unfolded my proposition. And a few moments later, Corky, you could have knocked me down with a feather. That blighted butler would have none of it. Instead of dancing round in circles on the tips of his toes, strewing roses from his bowler hat and crying, "My benefactor!" he pursed his ruddy lips and dished out an unequivocal refusal to cooperate. I stared at the man aghast. Then, thinking that he must have failed to grasp the true inwardness of the thing, with all its infinite promise of money for pickles, I went over it all again, speaking slowly and distinctly. But once more all that sprang to his lips was the raspberry. "Certainly not, sir," he said with cold rebuke, staring at me like an archdeacon who has found a choir boy sucking acid drops during divine service. "Would you have me betray a position of trust?" I said that was the idea in a nutshell, and he said I had surprised and shocked him. He then put on his coat, which he had removed in order to cuddle the housemaid, and showed me to the door. "Well, Corky, old horse, you have often seen me totter beneath the buffets of fate, only to come up smiling again after a brief interval for rest and recuperation. If you were asked to describe me in a word, the adjective you would probably employ is resilient, and you would be right. I am resilient. But on this occasion, I am not ashamed to confess that I felt like throwing in the towel and turning my face to the wall. So terrific had been the blow. I wonder if you have ever been slapped in the eye with a wet fish? I was once, during a religious argument with a fishmonger down Bethnal Green Way, and the sensation was almost identical. I had been so confident that I had wealth within my grasp. That was what stunned the soul and numbed the faculties. It had never so much as occurred to me to associate Oakshott with scruples. It was as if I had had in my possession the winning ticket in the Irish sweep, and the promoters had refused to brass up on the ground that they disapproved of lotteries. I left that butler's presence a broken man, and for some days went about in a sort of dream. Then I rallied sufficiently to be able to turn my thoughts, if only languidly, to the practical issues of life. I started to try to make arrangements for floating alone in connection with the purchase of that suit of dress clothes. But I was not my old self. Twice, from sheer inertia, I allowed good prospects to duck down side streets and escape untouched. And when one morning I ran across Looney Coote in Piccadilly and said, "Hello, Looney, old man, you're looking fine, can you lend me 5? And he affected to believe that I meant 5 bob, and paid off accordingly. I just trousered the money listlessly. How little it all seemed to matter. You remember Looney Coote, who was at school with us? As crazy a bimbo as ever went through life, one jump ahead of the lunacy commissioners, but rich beyond dreams of avarice. If he has lingered in your memory at all, it is probably as the bloke with the loudest laugh and the widest grin of your acquaintance. He should have been certified 10 years ago, but nobody can say he isn't sunny. This morning, however, a cloud was on his brow. He appeared to be brooding on something. "I'll swear it wasn't straight," I heard him utter. "Do you think it could have been straight?" "What, Looney, old man?" I asked. 5 bob isn't much, but one has to be civil. This game I've been telling you about." "He hadn't been telling me about any game," I said, and he seemed surprised. "Haven't I?" "I thought I had. I've been telling everybody. I went to one of those gambling places last night and got skinned. And on thinking it over, I'm convinced the game was not on the level. The thought of someone as rich as Looney going to gambling places in which I was not financially interested caused the old wound, as you may well imagine, to start throbbing afresh. He asked me what I was snorting about, and I said I wasn't snorting, I was groaning hollowly. "Where was this?" I asked. "Down Wimbledon way, one of those big houses on the common." "Corky, there are times when I have a feeling that I must be clairvoyant." As he spoke these words, I did not merely suspect that he was alluding to the auntery. I knew. I clutched his sleeve. "This house? What was it called? One of those fat-headed names they have out in those parts. The Beeches or the Weeping Willows or something. The Cedars. That's right, you know it, do you? Well, I've practically decided to give that nest of crooks a sharp lesson. I'm going—" I left him. I wanted to be alone, to think, to ponder, Corky, to turn this ghastly thing over in my mind and examine it in pitiless detail. And the more I turned it over and examined it, the more did I recoil in horror from the dark pit into which I was peering. If there is one thing that gives your clean-living, clean-thinking man the pip, it is being compelled to realize to what depths human nature can sink, if it spits on its hands and really gets down to it. For it was only too revoltingly obvious what had happened. That fiend in butler's shape had done the dirty on me. He stood definitely revealed as a twister of the first order. From the very moment I had started outlining my proposition, he must have resolved to swipe the fruits of my vision and broad outlook. No doubt he had begun putting matters in train directly I left him. To go and confront him was with me the work of an instant. Well, not exactly an instant, because it's a long way to Wimbledon, and a cab was not within my means. This time he was in my aunt's bedroom, having apparently decided to move in there for the duration. I found him reclining in an armchair, smoking a cigar and totting up figures on a sheet of paper, and it was not long before I saw that the 4pence which the journey had cost me was going to be money chucked away. The idea I had had was that on beholding me the man would quail, but he didn't. I suppose a man like that doesn't quail. Quailing, after all, is the result of conscience doing its stuff, and no doubt his conscience had packed up and handed in its portfolio during his early boyhood. When I towered over him with folded arms and said, "Serpent," he merely said, "Sir," and took another suck at the cigar. It made it rather difficult to know what to say next. However, I got down to it, accusing him roundly of having sneaked my big idea and chiselled me out of my legitimate earnings, and he admitted the charge with a complacent smirk. He even, though with your pure mind, Corky, you will find this hard to believe, thanked me for putting him on to a good thing. Finally, with incredible effrontery, he offered me a £5 in full settlement of all claims, saying that one of these days soft-heartedness would be his ruin. First, of course, I took a pop at coercing him into a partnership by threatening to inform my aunt, but he waved this away airily by saying that he knew a few things about me too, and that clinched that because there was a pretty good chance that he did. Then, laddie, I began to speak my mind. I'm a pretty eloquent chap when stirred, and I can't remember leaving out much. Waving away his degrading bribe, I called him names which I had heard second mates use to able-bodied seamen, and others which the able-bodied seaman had used in describing the second mates later on in the privacy of the forecastle. Then, turning on my heel, I strode out, pausing at the door to add something which a trimmer had once said to the barman of a Montevideo bar in my presence when the latter had refused to serve him on the ground that he had already had enough. And as I slammed the door, I was filled with a glow of exultation. It seemed to me that in a difficult situation I had borne myself extremely well. I don't know, Corky, if you have ever done the fine, dignified thing, refusing to accept money because it was tainted and there wasn't enough of it. But I've always noticed on these occasions that there comes a time when the glow of exaltation begins to ebb. Reason returns to its throne, and you find yourself wondering whether in doing the fine, dignified thing you have not behaved like a silly ass. With me this happened as I was about halfway through a restorative beer at a pub in Jermyn Street. For it was at that moment that the Bottleton East bloke came in and said he had been looking for me everywhere. What he had to tell me was that I must make my decision about that MC job within the next 24 hours, as the authorities could not hold it open any longer. And the thought that I had deliberately rejected the fiver, which would have placed a second-hand suit of dress clothes within my grasp, seemed to gash me like a knife. I assured him that I would let him know next day without fail, and went out to pace the streets and ponder. The whole thing was extraordinarily difficult and complex. On the one hand, pride forbade me to crawl back to that inky-souled butler and tell him that I would accept his grimy money after all. And yet, on the other hand, you see, with old Tuppy out of town, I hardly knew where to turn for the ready, and it was imperative that I obtain employment at an early date. And apart from that, what the bloke had said about watching me standing in the ring in my soup and fish had inflamed my imagination. I could see myself dominating that vast audience with upraised hand, and silence secured, informing it that the next item on the programme would be a 4-round bout between Porky Jones of Bermondsey and Slugger Smith of the New Cut, or whoever it might be, and I confess that I found the picture intoxicating. The thought of being the cynosure of all eyes, my lightest word greeted with respectful whistles, moved me proudly. Vanity, of course, but is any of us free from it? That night I set out once more for the Cedars. I was fully alive to the fact that the pride of the Ukridges was going to get one of the worst wallops it had ever sustained, but there are moments when pride has to take the short end. It was fortunate that I had gone prepared to have my amour-propre put through the ringer, for the first thing that happened was that I was refused admittance at the front door because I was not dressed. It was Oakshott himself who inflicted this indignity upon me, bidding me curtly to go round to the back and wait for him in his pantry. He added that he would be glad if I did it quick, as the guests would be arriving shortly. He seemed to think that the sight of what he evidently looked on as a forgotten man would distress them. So I went to the pantry and waited, and presently I could hear cars driving up, and merry voices calling to one another, and all the other indications of a big night, sounds which, as you may imagine, were like acid to the soul. It must have been nearly an hour before Oakshott condescended to show up, and when he did his manner was curt and forbidding. "Well," he said. I tried to think that he had said, "Well, sir?" but I knew he hadn't. It was only too plain from the very outset that the butler side of him was in complete abeyance. It was more like being granted an audience by a successful company promoter. I got down to the res immediately, informing him, for there is never any sense in wasting time on these occasions, that I had been thinking things over and had decided to take that fiver of his. Whereupon he informed me that he had been thinking it over and had decided not to ruddy well let me have it. There was a nasty glint in his eye as he spoke, which I didn't like. In the course of a long career I have seen men who wore that indefinable air of not intending to part with fivers, but never one in whom it was so well marked. "Your manner this morning was extremely offensive," he said. I sank the pride of the Ukridges another notch, and urged him not to allow mere surface manner to influence him. Had he, I asked, never heard of the gruff exterior that covers the heart of gold? "You called me a—" I could not deny it. And again I was forced to admit that this was substantially correct. "And just as you were about to leave, you turned at the door and called me a—" I saw that something must be done to check this train of thought. "Did I hurt your feelings, Oakshott?" I said sympathetically. "Did I wound you, Oakshott, old pal?" It was quite unintentional. If you had been watching my face, you would have seen a twinkle in my eye. I was kidding you, old friend. These pleasantries are not intended to be taken au pied de la lettre. He said he didn't know what au pied de la lettre meant, and I was supplying a rough diagram when an underling of sorts appeared, and told him he was wanted at the front. He left me flat, departing without a backward glance, and I started hunting round for the port. There should be some, I felt, in this pantry. If butlers come, can port be far behind? It's always a pretty safe rule to go on. I located it eventually in a cupboard and took a stimulating swig. It was just what I had been needing. It has frequently happened that a good go-in at the port at a critical moment has made all the difference to me as a thinking force. The stuff seems to act directly on the little grey cells, causing them to flex their muscles and chuck their chests out. A stiff whisky and soda sometimes has a similar effect, I have noticed, but port never fails. It did not fail me now. Quite suddenly, as if I had pressed a button, there rose before me a picture of my aunt's bedroom, and in the foreground of it was the mantelpiece with its handsome clock, worth, I estimated, fully 5 quid on the hoof. My aunt is a woman who likes to surround herself with costly objects of virtu, and who shall blame her? She has the price, earned with her gifted pen, and if that is how she feels like spending it, good luck to her, say I. Everywhere throughout her cultured home you will find rich ornaments, on any one of which the most cautious pawnbroker would be delighted to spring a princely sum. No, Corky, you are wrong. You choose your expressions carelessly. It was not my intention to pinch this clock. The transaction presented itself to my mind purely in the light of a temporary loan. No actual figures had been talked by the representative of the Bottleton East Mammoth Palace of Pugilism, but I considered that I was justified in assuming that for such a post as announcer and master of ceremonies, a very substantial salary might be taken as read. Well, dash it, my predecessor had died of cirrhosis of the liver. It cost money to die of cirrhosis of the liver. It seemed to me that it would be child's play to save enough out of that substantial salary in the first week to depop the clock and restore it to its place. The whole business deal, in short, would be consummated without my aunt being subjected to any annoyance or inconvenience whatsoever. It shows what a good whack at the port will do when I say that there was actually a moment, as I raced upstairs, when I told myself that, could she know the facts, she would be the first to approve and applaud. I had modified this view somewhat by the time I reached the door, but I did not allow this to deter me. I flung myself at the handle and turned it with zip and animation. And you may picture my chagrin, Corky, when not a damn thing happened. Oakshott had locked the door and taken away the key, creating a situation which would have compelled most men to confess themselves nonplussed, and one which, I must own, rattled even me for a bit. Then my knowledge of the terrain stood me in good stead. I had spent a considerable amount of time as an inmate of this house. It rarely happens that my aunt kicks me out before the middle of the second week, and I was familiar with its workings. I knew, for instance, that behind the potting shed down by the kitchen garden there was always kept a small but serviceable ladder. I was also aware that my aunt's bedroom had French windows opening on a balcony. With the aid of this ladder and a chisel, I would be able to laugh at locksmiths. Butlers always have chisels, so I went back to the pantry and had no difficulty in finding Oakshotts. There was an electric torch in the same drawer, and I felt that I might need that too. I had just pocketed these useful objects when Oakshott came in, and conceive my emotion when I saw that he was carrying a roll the size of a portmanteau. I presumed that he had come to the pantry to bank the stuff. A man in his position, with ready money raining down on him in a steady stream, would naturally wish to cash it from time to time, so as to leave room on his person for more. The sight of me seemed to give him little or no pleasure. His eyes took on a cold, poached egg look. "You still here?" he asked. "Still here," I assured him. "It's no good your waiting," he said churlishly. "You won't get a smell of that fiver." "I need it sorely," I replied. "So do I," he retorted. "And how easy it would be to give of your plenty. With a wad like that, you'd never know it was gone." "It won't be gone." I sighed. "So be it, Oakshott. You won't grudge me a drop of port? You can have some port. I'll have some too. Shall I hold the money?" "No, I thought you might want to have your hands free while you poured. You've been doing well, it would appear. Business is good?" "Fine. Well, mud in your eye, skin off your nose," I replied courteously, and we quaffed. He then left me and I made for the garden. Passing the drawing-room, I could hear sounds of mirth and merriment as the multitude took its pop at the games of chance, putting more cash into Oakeshot's pocket as it did so, and I was in two minds about pausing to bung a brick through the window. But this, I saw, though a relief to my feelings, would not further my business interests, so I let it go. I found the ladder and climbed to the balcony, and I was just about to get to work with the chisel when the lights in the room suddenly flashed on, giving me a bit of a jolt. Speedily recovering, I shoved my nose against the pane and saw Oakeshott. He was standing by the chest of drawers, still clutching the roll, and one sensed that, finding me in the pantry, he had decided that this would be a better place to put it. But before he could make his deposit, there came a sudden change in the character of the sounds proceeding from below, and he stood listening, rigid, like a stag at bay. My aunt's bedroom, I must mention, is just above the drawing-room, and if there are routs and revels going on in the latter apartment, you hears them clearly on the balcony. And inside the room, of course, they come up through the floor. What had arrested Oakeshott's attention was the fact that at this juncture there was an abrupt increase in the volume of the noise, together with a feminine scream or two, followed by a significant silence. Well, it did not take a man of my experience long to gather what had occurred. I have participated in raids in my time as a patron, as a waiter, as a washer of glasses, and once, in America, actually as a member of the squad conducting the operations, and I know the procedure. What happens is that there is first a universal yell of consternation, and the girls all scream, and then all is hushed, and everyone stands peering bleakly into the future, trying to think of names and addresses which will sound reasonably plausible to the gentleman with the notebook. Briefly, old horse Doom had come upon the Cedars, Wimbledon Common. The joint had been pulled. That Oakeshott, also, was able to put two and two together and form a swift diagnosis, was shown by the promptness with which he now acted. There was a large wardrobe not far from where he stood, a handsome piece in old walnut, and he dived right into it like a seal going after a chunk of halibut, taking his roll with him. And I popped in through the French windows and turned the key in the wardrobe door. Why I did this I cannot say, except that it seemed a good idea at the time. It was only some moments later that that extraordinary vision for which I have always been so remarkable suggested to me that not only clean fun but solid profit might be derived from the action. Here, it suddenly flashed upon me, was where I might make a bit. You see, I had studied this Oakeshott psychology, and my researches had left me with the conviction that he was one of those who, finding themselves locked in a wardrobe by a policeman during a raid on premises which they have been employing for illegal purposes, will endeavour to make a dicker with that policeman. On these occasions, as you are probably aware, while the patrons may hope to get off with a fine, mine host himself is in line for the jug, and a butler's liberty is very dear to him. It seemed to me that I was entitled to assume that if Oakeshott supposed that matters could be settled out of court, he would not count the cost. At any rate, the thing seemed a fair sporting venture, so I approached the wardrobe and proceeded to address myself in a crisp, cultured voice, the voice of the younger son of some aristocratic family who, after a year or two at Oxford, has entered the force via the Hendon Police College. "What," I inquired, "are you doing?" "They are Simmons," to which I replied, this time using the bass clef and adopting a bit of a Ponder's End accent, for I pictured this Simmons as just some ordinary flatty who had graduated from a board school. "I've got one of 'em locked in here, sir." "Oh, really?" I said. "Good work, Simmons. Guard him well. I'm off downstairs." I then went to the door, slammed it, and paused for a reply. It did not come immediately, and for a moment I feared that my knowledge of psychology might have let me down. But all was well. I can see now that Oakeshott was merely thinking it over and fighting a parsimonious man's battle between his love of liberty and the lust to retain his ill-begotten wealth. Presently there came from within a deprecating officer, followed by a rustling sound, and there stole out from under the door a fiver. I gathered it in, and there for a while the matter rested. I suppose Oakeshott realised that when you are buying a policeman's soul you cannot be niggardly, for a few moments later Another fiver came stealing out, and I pounced on that too. After this had gone on for some time, with my current account going up by leaps and bounds, I decided to take my profit and retire from the game. At any minute, a systematic search of the premises might be instituted. I couldn't imagine why it hadn't been done already. And if I were to be found on them, my presence might be hard to explain. The pure heart and the clean conscience are all very well, but they pay few dividends during a gambling raid, and it seemed to me that I would be better elsewhere. It would not, I felt, be beyond the scope of Oakshot's subtle mind to make the constabulary believe that it was I who had been master of the revels. So I unlocked the door and nipped out of the window and down the ladder. I have often wondered what Oakshot's reactions were when he stole out and found the place entirely free from P.C. Simmons's. It was a lovely night, with the stars twinkling away in the firmament, and the garden was very cool and peaceful. I would gladly have lingered and drunk in its fragrance, but I could not but feel that this was not the moment. Many people have complimented me on my nerve of steel, and rightly, but there is a time for reckless courage and a time for prudence. I don't mind admitting that at this particular juncture, with the troops of Midian prowling around, my emotions were those of a cat in a strange alley, and I was anxious to get away from it all. So marked was this feeling that, as I came abreast of the big water butt outside the kitchen door and heard a noise somewhere in the neighbourhood, as of regulation official boots trampling in the night, I halted with beating heart and raised the lid, intending to get inside. Whereupon a hand came out and slid a banknote into my grasp. Seeing that my dugout was already occupied, I passed on. This incident, as you may imagine, made a deep impression on me. It suggested to me that in following the policy of safety first and concentrating on the swift getaway, I might be passing up something good. If there was gold in the water butt, there might be the same elsewhere. I decided to draw another covert or two before leaving. And to cut a long story short, at the end of 10 minutes, my balance had substantially increased. Apparently, not all the patrons of the Cedars had been content to remain supinely in the drawing room when the gendarmerie came popping up through traps. There were those who had acted with that mettle and spirit which one likes to feel is the birthright of Englishmen, and had hopped out of the window to distribute themselves here and there about the grounds. One splendid fellow who came across with a tenner had snuggled into the cucumber frame. You felt it was the sort of thing Drake or Raleigh would have done. But now I was naturally anxious to count the takings. A methodical man always likes to know where he stands. It seemed to me that the potting shed was far enough away from the house to be out of the danger zone, so I made for it. And I was crossing the threshold with a gay, if sotto voce, song on my lips, when there was a sharp squeal from its dark interior, and I knew that here too some poor human waif had found and taken sanctuary. The next moment the rays of the torch, of which I had quickly pressed the button, revealed the well-known features of my Aunt Julia. There are times in life, Corky, when the man of iron self-control may be excused for momentarily losing his phlegm. It is a very unnerving thing to find an aunt whom you know to be in the south of France nestling in a potting shed in Wimbledon. A sharp gore blimey escaped my lips, and it was at once evident that the ear of love had recognised the familiar voice. "Stanley!" she cried. Usually when my aunt says Stanley, it is a tone of refined exasperation, the ejaculation being preliminary to a thorough ticking off. But now the general effect was vastly different. Her Stanley, on the present occasion, was roughly equivalent to the Gawain or Galahad, which a distressed damsel in difficulties with a dragon would have uttered on beholding her favourite knight entering the ring with drawn sword. "Aunt Julia!" I exclaimed. "What on earth are you doing here?" In broken accents and in a hushed whisper, starting from time to time at sudden noises, she told her story. It was after all quite simple. At Cannes, it seemed, she had met a friend, a recent arrival on the Riviera, who knew a man who had told her, the friend, that dark doings were in progress in the old home. And so arresting was this crony's report of the big evenings at the Cedars that my aunt had leaped into the first plane, intent on catching the miscreant responsible on the hop. I thought at first it must be you, Stanley. I drew myself up with a touch of hauteur. Indeed? But my friend said no. I should hope so. She said it was the butler. She was right, and I trusted him implicitly. A pity you did not consult me, Aunt Julia. I could have given you the lowdown on the man's true character. He looked so respectable. Many a man may look respectable, and yet be able to hide at will behind a spiral staircase. You saw through him like an X-ray. I suspected that the moment your back was turned, he would be up to some kind of hell, and I was correct. I came here tonight in the hope of being able to protect your interests. You were gambling? I switched on the torch, switching it off again immediately when she asked, with a momentary return to her normal brusque manner, if I wanted to bring every policeman on the premises to the spot. If, I said, you were able in that brief instant to get a deco at my person, Aunt Julia, you will have seen that I am not dressed. At functions like the one at which you have been assisting, the soup and fish is obligatory. I possess no soup and fish. What happened when you got here? I went into the drawing room and was just going to order those people out when a policeman came bursting in and told us that we were all under arrest. I promptly jumped out of the window. Stoutly done, Aunt Julia, the true Ukridge resource, and I took refuge here. What am I to do, Stanley? I must not be found. If I am, how can I convince the police that I am not responsible for the whole thing? The scandal will ruin me. Think, Stanley, think. I felt that it would be judicious to rub it in a bit. It is an unfortunate state of affairs, I agreed, and while it is not for me to criticize the arrangements which you may see fit to make where your own house is concerned, I cannot but feel that you have brought this on yourself. If you had placed me in charge during your absence, however, we can go into that later. What I propose to do now is to have a look around to see if the coast is clear. If it is, you'll be able to do a quiet sneak over the garden wall. Wait here until I return. If I do not return, you will know that I have fallen a victim to a nephew's devotion. Whether or not she said my hero, I'm not certain. It was what she ought to have said, but she is a woman who is apt to miss her cues at times. However, she did clasp my hand in a fevered clutch, and with a brief word bidding her keep her tail up, I went out. I hadn't gone more than 50 yards when I barged slap into a substantial body. It was coming around a tree, heading east, and I was going around the tree, heading west. We collided like a couple of mastodons, mixing it in a primeval swamp. Recovering its balance, it flashed a torch on me and a moment later spoke. It said, "Hello, Ukridge, old top, you here? What a night, what a night, what a night." I recognized the voice of Looney Coote. And picture my astonishment, Corky, when, flashing my torch on him, I perceived that he was wearing a policeman's uniform. When I commented on this, he laughed like a hyena calling to its mate and told me all. Chagrined at losing his money on the previous night at the Cedars, he had decided to fit himself out at a costumier's and go and raid the place, thus, as he himself put it, giving it the salutary lesson it had been asking for and making it think a bit. Such, Corky, is Looney Coote, and always has been, I felt, as I had so often felt in my earlier dealings with him, that his spiritual home was definitely Coley Hatch. Slowly I adjusted my faculties. You mean there aren't any cops here? Only me. I had to pause at this to master my emotion. When I thought of the intense, nervous strain to which I had been subjected and recalled the way I had been tiptoeing about the place and quaking at sudden noises and not letting a twig snap beneath my feet, and all because of this pie-faced half-wit, the temptation to haul off and bust him in the eye was very powerful. I succeeded in restraining myself, but my manner was cold and severe. "And the next thing that will happen," I said, "is that a bevy of genuine constables will blow in and you'll get 2 years hard for impersonating a policeman." This rattled him. I never thought of that. Muse on it now. The law gets a bit shirty, does it, if you impersonate policemen? It screams with annoyance. Well, 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 I'd better leg it, you think? I do. I will. Listen, Ukridge, old man, said Looney. There's something you can do for me. I locked an abundant multitude of the blighters in the drawing room. I should be vastly obliged if, after I've gone, you would let them out. Here's the key. And by the way, weren't you saying something this morning about wanting me to lend you money or something? I was. Would a tenner be enough? I could make it do. Then here you are. Talking of money, said Looney, there was a strong movement afoot among the blighters to bribe me to let them go. A good deal of feeling was shown. Amused me, I must confess. Well, good night, old man. It's been nice seeing you. Do you think if I'm stopped by a cop, I could get away with it by saying I was on my way to a fancy dress ball? You might try it. I will. Did I give you that tenner, he said. No? Then here you are. Good night, old man, good night. I went back to the potting shed and told my aunt that a quick burst from the garden wall was now in order, and she thanked me in a trembling voice and kissed me and said she had misjudged me. She then popped off at a good speed, and I pushed along to the drawing-room, forming my plans and schemes with lightning rapidity as I went. What Looney had said about the inmates trying to bribe him had stirred me not a little, and I am happy to say that he had not deceived me. I found them most anxious to do business. A few pourparlers through the keyhole, and the deal was fixed up at so much per head. The money was placed in my hands by a stately bird with white whiskers. He looked as if he might be the president of the Anti-Gambling League or some equally respectable institution, and there was no doubt that he had been asking himself quite often during his vigil what the harvest would be. There was champagne on the sideboard. When they had all gone, I sat down and opened a bottle. I felt that I had earned it. Ukridge paused and drew luxuriously at his cigar. There was a look of deep and sublime contentment on his face. So there you are, Corky. That is why I am now able to stand you lunch in this robber's den without a thought for the prices in the right-hand column. My aunt is all over me, and I am once more the petted guest in her home. This gives me a base from which I can operate while making up my mind how best to employ my enormous capital, for it is enormous. I'd hate to tell you, old horse, how much I've got. It would be tactless. You are a struggling young fellow who considers himself lucky if he snaffles 30 bob for an article in Interesting Bits on famous lovers of history or some such rot, and it would be agony to you to know how rolling I am. You would bite your lip and brood and get all sorts of subversive ideas about the unfair distribution of wealth. It wouldn't be long before we should have you throwing bombs. I reassured him. Don't worry, I'm not envious. It is enough for me to feel that after this magnificent spread you are going to pay the bill. There was a pause. I noticed that behind his ginger-beer-wired pince-nez, his eyes had taken on an apologetic look. I'm glad you brought that up, Corky, he said, for I was just wondering how to break it to you. I'm extraordinarily sorry, old horse, but I find that I have inadvertently left my money at home. You, I fear, will have to settle up. I'll pay you back next time I see you,